of the greatest challenge we have is leadership. And many people say it's the system, but whatever is the system actually is controlled by man.
Right.
And we see a lot of Christians go into politics and then they become, like the system. Is it really right for a Christian to be involved in politics?
And so the short answer, I would go to Proverbs 29:2, which says, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice.
Yes.
And when the wicked rule, the people groan. And so when the righteous are ruling a society,
Yes.
it is a blessing to the society. So for the church to say Christians shouldn't be in society, they're actually wishing curses on their neighbors.
Wow.
And that's not what they should be doing. But that also means that when you have Christians that get into politics that get corrupted, that's actually saying something about the church. Because the reality is that if the church is not doing discipline inside the church and removing wicked people from the church, then it becomes acceptable. And so then they go into society and do the same, or go into the politics and they do the same thing. Well, guess what? The problem started in the church and it just got adopted by the state.
That's true.
And that happens all the time, is that the church is the light of the world. If the church shines forth darkness rather than light, then the society is going to be dark.
That's correct.
And so one thing when you think about Christians in politics is you have to fix the church first. If you won't rebuke elders, in society, it doesn't matter if they call themselves a Christian or not in the politics. They're still going to end up like wicked men, is what the expectation should be. And so I think you have to make sure you don't get we would say, put the cart before the horse, where, the horse has to be get the church in order, and then you can get society in order. You can't get society in order until the church is in order. But one of the blessings that happens is if the church is in order, then it can affect society and it can give peace and prosperity to a culture, even though most of that culture isn't saved, right? Because money is the path that leads to destruction.
Yes.
But if it's constrained by the law of God and it's constrained by rulers that are ruling in righteousness, it will be a blessing to the people.
That's true. That's true.
So, I mean, related to that is when you vote, you should be really careful not to vote for wickedness, right? I mean, in Deuteronomy 1, it says who you can vote for, who should be the leaders of 10, leaders of 50, leaders of 100. And it starts with men who fear God. And so if they don't fear God, you shouldn't vote for them. And in Nigeria, a man who's going to steal, even if he calls himself a Christian, he doesn't fear God. Because God said all thieves have their place in the lake of fire. They don't fear God.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, but even a man who isn't necessarily saved, but fears God and acts in the fear of God, those are men that are qualified to rule. And so Christians, part of it is they need to step back and say, this is what it takes to rule.
That's correct.
But right now it's who pays off who gives, I'm going to give you food to get your vote, I'm going to do this. And it's the same in the United States. It's just the bribes are different, but it's still the politicians bribing the people with the people's money to try to get votes. But if the church wants to fix that, they actually have to step back and say, we're not going to vote for people that don't fear God.
That's true. Wow. That's great. And so, knowing that now, what about pastors who are ordained? So many of them are ordained, in Nigeria, before they call you a reverend, you have to be ordained and then you begin to wear a collar and all of that. So you see them, living, preaching the word of God and then going into politics. And I can say, except maybe we have better men in the future, but most of them, you can see the difference with the other politicians and the system at all. So what would you say about men or pastors going into politics?
Right. And when we think of the calling to pastoral ministry, a lot of people get called into pastoral ministry because they believe they can help people.
Yeah.
And some people might look and then they go, well, I could actually help more people by being a politician.
Yes.
Because I could constrain evil, I could do this, I could do that. This is what's required. So we have to be really careful not to just say that it's automatically wrong. There's been some good men in history, like Abraham Kuyper, who was the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, that really had some positive impacts on Netherlands. And he was a pastor, he was a seminary professor that ended up becoming Prime Minister. And it shifted their culture in good ways. And so we need to be really careful not to make a blanket statement.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what frequently happens in Nigeria is people pastor a church not because they're trying to help people, but they pastor a church because they're trying to get a following.
That's correct.
And because then once they have a following and they grow their following to a certain size, then they can use that as a political base to start
Definitely,
with,
yes.
so that they can get more power.
Yeah.
Well, that's all about them. But the reality is, if the church is dealing with it right, and they go, "You're trying to get you to follow, or you're trying to get me to follow you rather than following Christ," then that person already probably had problems in their pastoral ministry. So they shifted over because their pastoral ministry was about them, so they want to be in civil government about them. That's not a man you want in civil government in the first place. But it still comes back to you have to get the church in order first, because if you're holding pastors accountable like you should, then you constrain them already and they don't get a following for themselves, so then they don't have a following to take into politics.
Exactly.
So a lot of it is getting the church in order so that you can get the state in order.
It's all right. That's great. Thank you very much. This is very helpful too.